What would you call a joy that knows no bounds? A joy supreme. AARP celebrates Black History Month.
Well, my name is Theresa Ann Walker. I live in Chester, Virginia. I'm 93 years old, and I am blessed to be able to do and care for myself as much as I can at this ripe old age. It was very special. I lived in an integrated neighborhood until about 11 years old, and then my parents decided they were going to separate, and I went to live with my grandmother in Freehold, New Jersey. When I moved to Freehold, I went to a completely black school, 4 rooms. Jersey was a completely segregated town. I went to high school, started high school, white high school, and it was really a nightmare. The guidance counselor wanted to know, well, she just told me, you'll go in the general program, and I said, no, I want the scientific program, I'm going to college. And it was very prejudiced. I felt like a stranger, and it was a very disappointing experience. College, I went to Virginia Union. I applied to Virginia Union and Virginia State, and the Virginia Union was the first one to accept me, so that's where I went. And I loved it. And living in Freehold, there were no black professionals, and so I was wondering, what on earth can I be? And I decided, walking to high school, I saw the ladies sitting in the windows typing, and I thought that was glamorous, and that's what I decided I wanted to be, a secretary. When I got to Virginia Union, I majored in accounting, and I loved it. I met my husband at the Green Tea Social as a freshman at Virginia Union University. I was sitting at the piano, and you were to introduce yourself to one another, and he came over and introduced himself, and I asked him, he said he was from New Jersey, Merchantville, New Jersey, and I told him I knew someone from Merchantville, New Jersey, and it happened to be his sister, who was at summer assembly with me, a Bible assembly that the teenagers in New Jersey could go to each summer. Until our sophomore year, and I always knew he was considered to be very smart, and he was personable, and so one day I asked him, he had taken me to he was a little brother, he had pledged Alpha, and he was asked me to go to a party with him one Sunday afternoon, and I went. And that evening, he asked me to go to Moore Street's Christmas service. And we went to that, and he reached over and took my hand. And then we just started dating from then on, as much dating as you could do at Virginia Union at the time. Mm-hmm. Well, we had 4 children in 5 years, and we lived in Petersburg. My husband pastored Gilfield Baptist Church in Petersburg, and he was active with the civil rights movement in Petersburg. He was president of the NAACP, he was president of CORE, and president of the Petersburg Improvement Association. When my daughter was eligible to go to school, she was barred from all public schools in the state of Virginia. And we sued the state of Virginia, and we lost the case because she was 6, and they said you were permitted or allowed to go to school until age 7. You're not compelled to go to school until age 7. So we lost the case. But I had been in segregated situations all my life, and I wondered what was wrong. And I felt, I wish I could do something to STEM, the education, and make this country a better place for my daughter. I knew it could be, and I wanted it to be, and I always wished I could do something. But by then we had moved to, Dr. King had asked my husband to join him in Atlanta. He was impressed with the work he was doing in Petersburg. So we moved to Atlanta, and my daughter was able to go to school. But I always wanted to help do something to make the country a better place. I knew it could be a better place. And so when my husband came home and announced he was going to be with the Freedom Riders, he was going to be a Freedom Rider, I didn't tell my husband that I wanted to go on the Freedom Rides, but I thought about it, and I said, I just have to go. And so I packed up the children and sent them to their grandparents in New Jersey, and never did tell them. They all died not knowing. Packed up all the children, sent them to New Jersey for the summer, and I knew they would be fine, and decided to go on the Freedom Ride. The Freedom Riders were a group of young people and older people also, but they decided to, the ICC had said that it was legal to ride the buses and to use the restrooms and whatnot. And so we said, well, we'll test it. The first bus left, the first bus was burned, set on fire, and the children were beaten in Anniston, Alabama. And then some of the buses that followed, the people were also beaten, and the hospitals wouldn't accept them, and it was just terrible. And so the organizers just said, well, nobody will go on the Freedom Riders because of all of the violence. I was trained mostly by men. I should have been trained by a woman at some point. Well, if somebody spit on you, you were not to respond. If you crossed the picket line, you were not to respond. And if somebody put out a cigarette on you, you were not to respond. And so you were trained in nonviolence. And I thought that was the way to go. The ride we left Atlanta and headed for Jackson, Mississippi. There were 8 of us, I believe, 4 whites and 4 blacks. I was the only black woman. We were not allowed to get off the bus. The bus stopped in Montgomery and Birmingham, and we were not allowed to get off the bus to get a sandwich or to go to the bathroom or anything. And when we got to Jackson, Mississippi, the police and the paddy wagons were waiting. We went right into the white waiting room, and the paddy wagon took us off to the Jackson City jail. I was afraid. It was my first time, I believe. I've been many times now, but I think it was my first time. I was segregated in the jail cell. The mice were running up and down the bars of the jail, and I was in the cell by myself. And the next morning, about 6 o'clock, they came and got us and put us in the paddy wagon and took us to the Hinds County Jail. And at that time, the cell was crowded with black women. There were about 13 or 14 black women in the cell with two cots. And they gave us dirty, filthy mattresses, and we had to sleep on the floor. Picture, my husband took this famous picture of Dr. King in the Birmingham jail. And Dr. King said, "Oh, Wyatt, let me take a picture of you." And that's the legend of the story. Resilience is a trait of Black people. You do what you have to do.
Do you feel that you were successful in completing your training?
Yes, but some of the girls in the cell with me had sewn pockets under their skirt, and they had their toothbrushes and things like that. I had nothing but my trench coat, and I used that as a blanket. Everybody, all the women have a story. In that jail cell, the people were from different Mississippi, Louisiana, California. Every one of them had a different story. I didn't think my parents would understand, and they would have worried to death if I had told them I was going. So that's why I didn't tell them. I did write my children a letter while I was in the jail. I don't know where I got the paper from, but I did send them a letter. And I understand from my grandmother, when I did go to visit them, and she told me, she said, "Oh, I was so embarrassed to get a letter with Hinds County Jail on it." But I don't know what she thought I did, but we never ever discussed it. My husband, when he was with Dr. King, the board did not want him to have a church. They felt that would detract from his work with the movement. And after 4 years of going through people calling all the time, white people calling and threatening and having to protect your children, we had it. And so someone offered him a job. They said they were selling the Negro Heritage Library. And they came to talk to Dr. King about the books, encyclopedias really. And they said they didn't have anybody Black on the board. They just had Black salesmen. And they said they couldn't find anybody like you, Wyatt. And so my husband said, "Well, I'll go." And so that's how we ended up in New York. And he had gotten his, he'd gotten his MDiv, Master of Divinity at Virginia Union. And then he was trained, and he was assistant to Adam Clayton Powell. I asked him to fill his pulpit while he was away. And then he was finally called to Canaan Baptist Church, and he accepted. And that's how we got to New York and in the church. Most people that I knew grew up in the church. And so that was like a refuge. When you walk in church, Black church, and you're all dressed up and whatnot, you just feel special. And you know that they're going to tell you something about life that will hold you through the week. Well, my husband worked himself to death. He was a true pastor. It was a big church family, and we were like the daddy and the mama, and the church members were all our children. And so he had 4 strokes. He had one that we didn't know. He had one getting ready to do a funeral for a friend of mine. And when he got to the hospital, they found out that he had had a previous stroke that we didn't know anything about. And then that night he had another stroke in the hospital. And back then I had 4 children in 5 years, and so it was kind of hard. I went to church when I could, and the children went to, they were small too, but they sang in the little children's choir, directed by Altona Johns, Dr. Vernon Johns' wife. And we were family like then too, but it was different when I got to Canaan in New York, where he pastored for 37 years. Schooled her before homeschooling was popular, and we're proud to say that she finished Howard University, one of the HBCUs, in 3 years, and went on and did a master's at Yale in fine arts. Children needed to know how hard their father worked for them in civil rights, and not to let anybody take advantage of them if they could, and wherever they saw injustice, to stop it. That was one thing that I primarily wanted them to know. And the other thing was just I wanted them to be healthy and take care of one another, and just to be a family. I did a lot of volunteer work when I was able, and I didn't realize how valuable volunteer work is, or was then. But now that I'm older and I can't do things that I used to do, and I don't know a lot of people because I wasn't able to meet too many people with my husband being so ill and having to care for him. And it's that volunteerism is excellent, and Chesterfield has a very good program for seniors.